billionaire forced his employee to be his wife, but destiny made him lose his heart forever. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. Emma Mitchell stared at Blake Anderson across his mahogany desk, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. The words he'd just spoken hung in the air like smoke from a fire she wasn't sure she wanted to put out. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" she asked, setting the mug down with deliberate care. Her voice carried that edge she'd perfected over 3.5 years of working for Manhattan's most impossible CEO. Blake didn't look up from his tablet, fingers scrolling through what she knew was probably his 14th profit report of the morning. "You heard me correctly, Mitchell. I need you to pretend to be my wife for a few days." The floor-to-ceiling windows of the 47th floor office framed the bustling streets of the Upper East Side below, but Emma felt like the world had suddenly gone silent. She studied Blake's face, that sharp jawline that had probably cost him nothing but had cost plenty of women their peace of mind, the steel gray eyes that missed nothing, the perfectly styled dark hair that somehow never moved despite his habit of running his hands through it when he was stressed, which, let's be honest, was always Blake. She leaned forward, her tone taking on the patient quality she usually reserved for explaining why he couldn't fire people for breathing too loudly. "I organize your calendar, manage your meetings, and occasionally remind you to eat actual food instead of surviving on espresso and pure spite. But I draw the line at playing pretend wife." Now he looked up, those gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach do something stupid, the same something stupid it had been doing for the past year, which she'd been studiously ignoring. "Hashim al-Mansouri is flying in from Dubai tomorrow," Blake said, his voice carrying that crisp authority that made board members tremble. "He's old school, traditional. Family values matter to him more than quarterly projections." Emma crossed her arms. "And this concerns me how? The Meridian Tower project depends on this partnership. We're talking about a $2 billion deal, Mitchell. $2 billion. He stood, walking to the window with those long strides that ate up distance like he was personally offended by space existing between him and his destination. "Al-Mansouri wants to meet my family, specifically my wife. Here's a crazy idea," Emma said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Get an actual wife." Blake turned back to her, and for just a moment something flickered across his face, something that looked almost vulnerable, but it was gone so fast she might have imagined it. "I don't have time for a wife," he said flatly. "I have time for a business arrangement, 5 days, a few dinners, some small talk, a weekend in the Hamptons. You smile, nod appropriately, and let him believe I'm capable of human emotion." Emma stood up, her chair rolling back to bump against the credenza where Blake kept his collection of architectural awards. Awards that proved he was brilliant at building things but apparently hopeless at building relationships. "You're certifiably insane," she said, but her voice lacked the finality she'd intended. "Because here's the thing about working for Blake Anderson for 3.5 years. You learned to read between the lines of his carefully constructed control, and right now those lines were spelling out something that looked suspiciously like desperation. $100,000, Blake said quietly. Emma's coffee mug slipped from her fingers. She caught it just before it hit the Persian rug that probably cost more than her annual rent. "What? 100,000 cash, tax-free bonus for services rendered." His voice was steady, businesslike, as if they were negotiating a catering contract instead of her temporary transformation into Mrs. Blake Anderson. "All you have to do is convince one man that we're married, that you can tolerate being around me for reasons other than your paycheck." The words hung between them, loaded with implications that made Emma's chest tight. She looked at Blake, really looked at him. The perfectly pressed suit that probably cost more than her car, the hands that never shook, even when he was closing deals that would make grown men weep, the careful distance he maintained from everyone, including her, as if emotional connection was a disease he might catch. "Why me?" she asked, and her voice came out softer than she'd intended. "You could hire an actress, someone who wouldn't know the difference between your coffee preferences and your complete inability to remember birthdays." Blake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it. "Because you already know the worst parts of me," he said, "and you haven't quit yet." The admission settled between them like a challenge. Emma felt her resolve wavering. the way it always did when Blake accidentally revealed the human being buried beneath all that controlled perfection. She thought about her student loans, still hanging over her head like storm clouds, her sister's medical bills that kept growing despite the insurance, her tiny apartment in Brooklyn Heights where the radiator clanged like it was personally angry at winter. $100,000 would change everything. Just pretend? She asked, hating how uncertain she sounded. Blake nodded, but something in his expression had shifted. Just pretend. Emma looked out at the city sprawling below them, at the millions of people rushing through their lives, probably none of them facing quite this particular brand of insanity. She thought about all the times she'd watched Blake work late into the night, the way he forgot to eat when he was focused, the rare moments when his guard dropped and she glimpsed the man underneath the CEO mask. I want it in writing, she said finally. Official contract and ground rules. Blake's mouth curved into what might have been a smile if he remembered how those worked. Deal. As Emma shook his hand, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making the smartest decision of her life. She sat in her cramped Brooklyn Heights apartment at 6 a.m., surrounded by fashion magazines, etiquette books, and 3 different tabs open on her laptop showing how to act like you're married to a billionaire. Her cat, Biscuit, judged her silently from his perch on the windowsill. Don't look at me like that, she muttered, scrolling through an article titled, 10 Signs You're Really in Love. This is just business. Her phone buzzed. Blake, of course. The man probably slept with his phone surgically attached to his hand. Text message. Car will pick you up at 8. We're going shopping. Emma stared at the message. Shopping. With Blake Anderson. The man who wore the same 3 brands of suits and probably hadn't set foot in a store that didn't require an appointment and a credit check. She typed back. Shopping for what exactly? The response came immediately. A wife who looks the part. Wear something. Forgettable. Forgettable, Emma said to Biscuit. Hear that? I need to look forgettable so I can be transformed into unforgettable. This is my life now. 2 hours later, Emma stood on the sidewalk outside Bergdorf Goodman, feeling like she'd accidentally wandered into someone else's extremely expensive life. The black town car that had picked her up was still running, the driver waiting with the kind of patience that came from being paid very well to not ask questions. Blake emerged from the store's entrance, and Emma's breath caught. She'd seen him in suits every day for 3.5 years, but somehow he looked different in the morning light, filtering through the city's geometric shadows. More human, which was annoying because she was trying very hard to think of this as strictly business. You're late, he said, but his voice lacked its usual sharp edge. You said 8, it's 8:03. Emma held up her phone as evidence. That's not late, that's fashionably prompt. Blake's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to count. Al-Mansuri's wife is flying in with him. Apparently she wants to meet you. Today, which means we have exactly 4 hours to transform you from my assistant into my wife. Transform me? Emma's voice rose an octave. What exactly is wrong with how I look? Blake's gaze swept over her simple black dress and flats, her standard work uniform. When his eyes met hers again, something in his expression had softened. Nothing, he said quietly. But Emma Mitchell, assistant, wears practical clothes and keeps her hair in a bun because she's too busy managing other people's lives to worry about her own. Mrs. Blake Anderson would have different priorities. The way he said her name, Mrs. Blake Anderson, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, which was ridiculous. This was pretend. This was business. This was definitely not making her imagine what it would feel like if it were real. Fine, she said. But I get to approve everything. I'm not wearing anything that makes me look like I belong on a yacht in Monaco. You might be surprised, Blake said, holding the door open for her. Elegance isn't about the price tag. The next 3 hours were a whirlwind of silk and cashmere, of sales associates who treated Blake like royalty, and Emma like a fascinating project. She tried on dresses that cost more than her rent, shoes that felt like walking on clouds, and jewelry that caught the light like captured stars. Blake sat in a leather chair in the private shopping suite, his laptop open but ignored, watching her emerge from the fitting room in outfit after outfit. Each time his expression grew more unreadable. That one, he said when she appeared in a navy dress that hugged her curves without being obvious about it. The fabric felt like liquid, and the cut made her look like she belonged in boardrooms and charity galas. It's beautiful, Emma admitted, turning to see herself in the 3-way mirror. But I feel like I'm wearing a costume. You are, Blake said, and something in his voice made her look at him in the mirror. We both are. Their eyes met in the reflection, and for a moment, the air in the room felt charged with something Emma couldn't name. Then Blake's phone rang, shattering the spell. "Anderson," he answered, all business again. "Yes, I know they landed early. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at Emma. "They're here. Al-Mansouri and his wife are at the Four Seasons. We need to go. Now." Emma's stomach dropped. "Blake, I can't do this. What if they ask questions I can't answer? What if they can tell we're fake?" Blake stood, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady through the silk of her dress. "Emma." His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "You know me better than anyone. You know how I take my coffee. What makes me laugh. What keeps me up at night worrying about the business. You know when I'm lying to investors and when I'm telling the truth. If anyone can convince them we're married, it's you. But what if— Hey." Blake's thumb brushed across her collarbone, a gesture so gentle it made her forget how to breathe. "We've got this. Trust me." Emma looked up at him, really looked at him, at the man who drove her crazy with his impossible standards and his refusal to let anyone get close, at the man who was trusting her with his $2 billion deal, and maybe, just maybe, something more. "Okay," she whispered, "but if this goes wrong, I'm blaming you." Blake's smile was real this time, transforming his whole face. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As they left Bergdorf's, Emma caught their reflection in the store's windows. They looked like they belonged together, the powerful CEO and his elegant wife, walking in perfect sync through the heart of Manhattan. The scary part was how natural it felt. She stood in the elevator at the Four Seasons, watching the numbers climb toward the penthouse level where her entire future, and Blake's $2 billion deal, waited behind mahogany doors. Blake stood beside her, adjusting his cufflinks with the kind of nervous precision that told her he was just as terrified as she was, even if his face showed nothing but cool confidence. "Remember," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the elevator's whisper-quiet assent, "we've been married for 2 years. We met when you were working at a small consulting firm. I pursued you for 3 months before you agreed to dinner." "3 months?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "What took you so long?" Blake's mouth curved into what might have been a smile. "You were worth the wait." The way he said it, like he meant it, made Emma's chest tighten. Before she could analyze that feeling, the elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open. "Showtime," Blake murmured, and suddenly his hand was on the small of her back, warm and possessive in a way that sent electricity racing up her spine. The penthouse suite was a study in understated luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Central Park, furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars, and fresh white orchids arranged with the kind of careless perfection that screamed serious money. Hashim Al-Mansouri rose from a cream-colored sofa as they entered, and Emma immediately understood why Blake had been nervous. The man commanded attention without saying a word. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of presence that came from building empires and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Beside him stood a woman who could have stepped out of a magazine spread about international elegance. Layla Al-Mansouri was probably in her early 50s, with kind eyes and the sort of effortless grace that made Emma suddenly very aware of every step she took. "Blake." Hashim's voice carried the warmth of genuine friendship as he crossed the room with open arms. "My friend, you look well. Success suits you." "Hashim, always a pleasure." Blake's handshake turned into a brief embrace, and Emma was struck by how natural he seemed. How normal. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Emma." And there it was, the moment of truth. Emma stepped forward, extending her hand with what she hoped was the right combination of confidence and warmth. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Blake speaks of you often." Hashim took her hand in both of his smile genuine and immediate. "Please call me Hashim, and this is my wife, Layla." Layla moved forward with fluid grace, and instead of shaking hands, she leaned in to kiss Emma's cheeks in the European fashion. Her perfume was subtle and expensive, and her smile was unexpectedly warm. "Emma," Layla said, her accent giving the name a musical quality, "you're even more beautiful than Blake described, though he did warn us you were too good for him." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, partly from the compliment and partly from the way Blake's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her back. "He's being modest," she said, glancing up at him with what she hoped looked like adoration instead of panic. "Blake has many hidden talents." "Does he now?" Hashim's eyes sparkled with amusement. "This I must hear about. Come, sit." Layla has been looking forward to meeting the woman who finally captured our Blake's heart. They settled onto the plush sofas, Blake and Emma on one side, the Al-Mansouris across from them. Blake's arm came around Emma's shoulders in a gesture so natural she almost forgot it was an act. Almost. "So tell me," Layla said, leaning forward with the kind of interest that suggested she was genuinely curious, not just making polite conversation. "How did you two meet? Blake is notoriously, how do you say, married to his work." Emma felt Blake tense beside her, but she'd prepared for this question. "Sort of. I was working at a small consulting firm," she began, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Blake's company was one of our clients, and I was assigned to his account. He was challenging." "Challenging," Hashim laughed. "That's a diplomatic way to put it. He had very specific requirements," Emma continued, warming to her story. "Everything had to be perfect. His coffee at exactly 7:47 a.m., not 7:45, not 7:50. His meeting scheduled with precisely 15 minutes between them. Never 14, never 16. And he had this habit of—" She paused, glancing at Blake with mock exasperation. "He used to reorganize my desk when he thought I wasn't looking." Blake's eyebrows rose. "I was helping you optimize your workspace efficiency. You moved my stapler 3 times in 1 week. It was blocking your natural workflow pattern." Layla burst into delighted laughter. "Oh, this is wonderful. Blake, you didn't tell us you were such a, what's the word, control enthusiast?" "I prefer detail-oriented," Blake said dryly, but Emma could see the genuine amusement in his eyes. Emma found it less charming initially. "Initially?" Hashim prompted. Emma felt herself slipping into the story, the lies becoming easier as they mixed with unexpected truths. "He wore me down gradually. He'd bring me coffee when I worked late, even though he claimed it was just because he needed me to be alert for the morning meetings. He remembered that I preferred almond milk. He noticed when I was stressed about my sister's medical situation, and quietly arranged for the consulting firm to get a bonus that month." The last part was true. Blake had done that, though she'd never known for certain it was him until much later. "And when did you know?" Layla asked softly. "When did you realize you loved him?" The question hit Emma like a physical blow. She looked at Blake, searching for some signal, some hint of what she should say, but his expression had gone carefully neutral, as if her answer mattered more than it should for a business arrangement. "It was—" Emma started, then stopped. The truth rose in her throat, unexpected and terrifying. "It was a Tuesday evening around 8 p.m. I was finishing up some reports and Blake was in his office working late as usual. I heard this music coming from his office. Piano music. Beautiful, sad, complicated. I realized he was playing and I'd never heard him do anything just for the joy of it. Something about seeing him like that, vulnerable and human, and..." She trailed off, aware that she was saying too much, revealing too much. "And?" Layla prompted gently. Emma's eyes met Blake's, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "And I realized I was in love with a man who played Chopin when he thought no one was listening." The silence that followed felt heavy with truth, even though it was supposed to be a lie. Blake's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt more real than anything they'd practiced. "Chopin," Hashim said thoughtfully. "A man of hidden depths indeed. Very hidden," Blake said quietly, his thumb stroking across Emma's knuckles. "Emma has a way of finding things I didn't know were there." Layla sighed happily. "This is exactly what we hoped to see. Hashim, don't you think they're perfect together?" "Indeed," Hashim agreed. "Blake, you're a fortunate man. Emma, you've clearly been good for him. I haven't seen him this relaxed in years." As the conversation continued, Emma found herself studying Blake's profile, the way his shoulders had actually loosened, the way he laughed at Hashim's stories about their early business ventures. She thought about what she'd said about the piano, about falling in love with his hidden vulnerability. The terrifying part wasn't that she'd lied so convincingly. Emma stood in the marble foyer, still wearing the navy dress that had transformed her into Mrs. Blake Anderson for the afternoon, staring at surroundings that belonged in Architectural Digest rather than real life. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan twinkling below like a scattered jewelry box, and she could hear the distant hum of traffic 43 floors down. Blake was behind her, probably doing that thing where he loosened his tie with sharp, precise movements while mentally cataloging everything that had gone right or wrong in the past 3 hours. She could practically hear his brain working. "That went well," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Emma turned around. He was indeed loosening his tie, but his movements seemed less controlled than usual, almost uncertain. "Did it?" she asked. "Because I feel like I just told two strangers the most personal truth about my feelings while pretending it was all made up." Blake's hands stilled on his tie. The piano story. The piano story." Emma kicked off the designer heels that had been slowly murdering her feet. "Blake, why didn't you ever tell me you played? You never asked. You never gave me the impression there was anything to ask about." Emma walked to the massive windows, grateful for the cool glass against her flushed cheek. 3.5 years, and I thought I knew you. You do know me." Blake's voice was closer now. She could see his reflection in the window, standing a few feet behind her. "You know I'm impossible to work for. You know I survive on espresso and stubbornness. You know I reorganize things when I'm nervous. But I don't know that you play Chopin when you think no one's listening." Emma turned to face him. "I don't know what keeps you up at night besides work. I don't know why you—" She gestured helplessly at the space between them. "Why you keep everyone at arm's length." Blake was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Then he did something that surprised her. He actually sat down on the pristine white sofa, his perfect posture finally relaxing. "My father," he said quietly. "He was a pianist. Professionally, I mean. He played with the New York Philharmonic until I was 8. Emma felt her breath catch. In 3.5 years, Blake had never mentioned his family beyond the bare facts required for emergency contacts. "What happened when you were 8? He left." Blake's voice was matter-of-fact, but Emma could hear the careful control underneath. "One day he was teaching me für Elise. The next day his piano bench was empty and his sheet music was gone. My mother said he'd gotten an opportunity in Europe. I found out years later he'd just started over. New wife, new family, new life." Emma's chest tightened. "Blake, the piano stayed," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "For months I kept practicing, thinking if I got good enough, maybe he'd come back to hear me play. Stupid, right?" "You were 8, Emma said softly. "Nothing about that is stupid." Blake looked up at her then, and she saw something in his expression that made her want to cross the room and wrap her arms around him, which was definitely not part of their business arrangement. "I still play sometimes," he admitted. "Late at night when I can't sleep. When the numbers don't add up and the deals won't close and I feel like I'm drowning in other people's expectations." "Like last Tuesday night?" Blake's mouth curved into a rueful smile. "Like last Tuesday night. I didn't know you were still in the office. I'm always still in the office. Someone has to make sure you don't work yourself into an early grave." Emma sat down on the opposite end of the sofa, curling her legs under her. "Will you play for me sometime? I mean, really play. Not because you're stressed or sad, but because you want to." Blake looked at her for a long moment as if he was trying to solve a particularly complex equation. "Emma, what are we doing here? You mean besides convincing a Dubai businessman that we're madly in love? I mean—" Blake ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. "This afternoon, when you told that story about falling in love with me, you looked like you meant it." Emma's heart started beating faster. "I'm a better actress than I thought." "Are you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Emma felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Blake was asking her to jump without knowing if there was water below or rocks. A soft scratching sound broke the tension, followed by a friendly woof from somewhere deeper in the apartment. "Cooper," Blake explained, standing up. "I should let him out of the bedroom before he destroys the door." A moment later, a golden retriever bounded into the living room with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested he'd been waiting behind that door for hours. He made a beeline for Emma, tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. "Well, hello there, handsome," Emma laughed, scratching behind Cooper's ears as he attempted to climb into her lap, despite being far too large for such ambitions. "Aren't you a sweetheart?" "He likes you," Blake observed, and there was something almost surprised in his voice. "Dogs usually do. They can sense when someone's a fellow overthinker." Emma grinned as Cooper settled beside her on the sofa, his head on her knee. "How long have you had him?" 2 years. I found him at a shelter in Queens. He'd been returned 3 times because he was too needy." Blake's voice carried a note of bitter understanding. "Apparently some people don't appreciate being needed." Emma looked up at Blake, seeing the careful vulnerability in his expression. "But you do. I'm learning to." The admission was quiet, almost lost in the sound of Cooper's contented sighing as Emma continued to pet him. But Emma heard it, and she understood what Blake wasn't saying. That maybe, just maybe, he was learning to need people too. "Blake?" she started, then stopped. Because what was she supposed to say? That this fake marriage was starting to feel more real than any relationship she'd ever had? That watching him with his dog, hearing about his father, seeing him vulnerable and human, was making her forget why this was supposed to be temporary? Her phone buzzed, saving her from having to finish the thought. A text from her sister. "How's the fake husband? Still fake?" Emma stared at the message, aware that Blake was watching her face. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just my sister being—" Emma paused. "Actually, Blake, what happens after this week? I mean, with Al Mansouri. Does he expect to see us together again? Are we supposed to? How does a fake marriage end?" Blake was quiet for so long that Emma looked up at him. His expression had gone carefully blank, the vulnerable man from moments before disappearing behind his CEO mask. "We'll figure that out when the deal is signed," he said finally. But as Emma watched him retreat into that controlled distance, she realized something that terrified her. She blinked at the unfamiliar ceiling, high, pristine white, with crown molding that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Right. Blake's guest room. Day 3 of being Mrs. Blake Anderson, and her brain was still struggling to keep up with her new reality. The sound of sizzling bacon drifted through the door, followed by Cooper's happy barking. Emma checked her phone. 7:15 a.m., which meant Blake had been up for at least an hour, because the man treated sleep like an inconvenient business meeting he couldn't postpone indefinitely. She padded to the kitchen in the silk pajamas Blake had insisted she needed. Al Mansouri might stop by unexpectedly, her bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. The sight that greeted her made her stop dead in her tracks. Blake Anderson, CEO billionaire man who probably had people whose job it was to toast his bread, was standing at a massive steel range, flipping pancakes with the kind of focused concentration he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He was wearing jeans. Actual jeans, soft and faded, paired with a gray Henley that hugged his shoulders in ways his tailored suits never did. Cooper sat at attention nearby, clearly hoping for bacon scraps, his tail creating a steady drumbeat against the cabinet. "You cook," Emma said, because her brain seemed to have forgotten how to form more complex sentences. Blake glanced over his shoulder, and his expression did something complicated when he saw her. "Sometimes, when I need to think." "What are you thinking about at 7 in the morning that requires pancakes?" "The Meridian Project timeline mostly. Al Mansouri wants to accelerate the construction schedule, which means renegotiating contracts with 16 different subcontractors." Blake flipped another pancake with perhaps more force than necessary. "Also, you look—" He trailed off, and Emma became hyper-aware of how the silk pajamas felt against her skin, how her hair was probably a disaster, how she wasn't wearing any makeup. "Like I just woke up?" she supplied. "Beautiful," Blake said quietly. "You look beautiful." The word hung between them like a confession. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, and suddenly the spacious kitchen felt very small. "Blake, coffee's ready," he said quickly, turning back to the stove. "Your usual. Almond milk, 1 sugar, shot of vanilla." Emma stared at his back, at the way his shoulders tensed like he was bracing for impact. He knew how she took her coffee. Not just the basics. He knew about the vanilla, which she'd only mentioned once months ago when they'd been stuck in the office until midnight working on the Henderson acquisition. "How long have you been paying attention to details like that?" she asked softly. Blake's hands stilled on the spatula. "Longer than I should have been." The admission settled between them like a dare. Emma crossed the kitchen, stopping just close enough to smell his cologne mixed with the scent of breakfast. Close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the careful control in his movements. "Blake, look at me." He turned, and the expression in his gray eyes made her breath catch. There was want there, and confusion, and something that looked dangerously like hope. "This is getting complicated," he said. It was always complicated. Emma reached up, her fingers ghosting across his cheek. "We just pretended it wasn't." Blake's hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his face. "Emma, if we cross this line—" "What line?" Her voice came out breathier than she'd intended. "The one where we stop pretending this is just business? Because I think we crossed that yesterday when you told me about your father. That's different. That was just what? Just you trusting me with the most painful part of your past? Just you letting me see who you really are underneath all that perfect control?" Blake's thumb stroked across her knuckles, and Emma felt that touch all the way down to her toes. "You don't understand. I don't do relationships, Emma. I don't do complicated. I do contracts and clearly defined terms, and And bacon pancakes at 7 in the morning because you can't sleep, Emma interrupted. And playing Chopin when you think no one's listening. And rescuing dogs that are too needy because you understand what it feels like to be returned. Blake's expression cracked, and for a moment Emma saw straight through to the man beneath. Scared, vulnerable, wanting something he'd convinced himself he couldn't have. Emma, her name was barely a whisper. The space between them disappeared. Emma wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly Blake's hands were in her hair and her arms were around his neck, and they were kissing like they'd been drowning and had just found air. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and when he pressed her back against the granite counter, Emma forgot every reason why this was supposed to be fake. His mouth was gentle but insistent, asking questions her body was desperate to answer. Cooper's sharp bark broke them apart. They sprang away from each other, Emma's heart hammering as Blake ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up in ways that were criminally attractive. "The door," Blake said, his voice rough. "Someone's at the door." Emma tried to smooth her pajamas, tried to look like she hadn't just been thoroughly kissed in her fake husband's kitchen. Who would be here this early? Blake was already moving toward the front door, his CEO mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. But Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands shook slightly as he checked the security monitor. "It's Layla," he said, turning back to Emma with something like panic in his eyes. "Al Mansuri's wife, she's here. Now? At 7:30 in the morning? She said she wanted to get to know you better. I thought she meant later, with warning, and clothes." Blake's gaze swept over Emma's silk pajamas. "Emma, we need to—" The doorbell rang again, followed by Layla's voice calling through the intercom. "Blake? Emma? I brought pastries from that lovely bakery downstairs. I hope you don't mind the early visit." Emma looked at Blake at the kitchen behind them with clear evidence of domestic intimacy. 2 coffee mugs, pancakes on the griddle, Cooper's food bowl, her bare feet, and his casual clothes. At the space between them that still hummed with the aftermath of their kiss. "Actually," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded, "maybe this is perfect. Nothing says happily married like being caught having breakfast together in our pajamas." Blake's expression shifted from panic to something that might have been admiration. "You're brilliant." "I know." Emma grinned, some of her confidence returning. "Now go let your friend in while I rescue those pancakes, and Blake? Yeah? Next time you want to cook breakfast, maybe warn me. I would have worn the pajamas with the little hearts." Blake's laugh was warm and real, and as he went to answer the door, Emma caught her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. Her hair was messed up, her lips were swollen from kissing, and she was grinning like an idiot. She looked exactly like a woman who was falling in love with her husband. "Oh, this is perfect." Layla breezed into the penthouse with the confidence of someone who belonged in luxury, carrying an elegant pastry box and beaming at the domestic scene before her. "Blake, darling, you look so relaxed, and Emma, those pajamas are gorgeous. Olivia von Halle?" Emma glanced down at the silk set that Blake had selected for her. Yes, I think so." "Exquisite taste," Layla said approvingly, then turned to Blake with a knowing smile. "I can see why you fell so hard, my dear. There's nothing quite like a woman who looks beautiful first thing in the morning." Blake's eyes found Emma's across the kitchen, and she saw her own confusion reflected there. The kiss was still humming between them, making the air feel charged and dangerous. "Coffee?" Blake offered, his voice only slightly rougher than usual. We were just having breakfast." "How wonderfully domestic." Layla settled onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island, arranging her designer purse with practiced ease. Cooper immediately went to investigate, tail wagging hopefully. "Oh, and who is this handsome fellow?" "Cooper," Emma said, grateful for the distraction. "Blake's partner in crime. He's beautiful. Hashim and I had a golden retriever when our children were young. Magnificent dogs." Layla accepted the coffee Blake offered her, inhaling appreciatively. "Now then, I hope you don't mind me dropping by so early, but I wanted to steal Emma away today. For some girl time, if you will." Emma nearly choked on her coffee. "Girl time?" "Shopping, lunch, perhaps a spa treatment. I know so few women in New York, and I find myself quite charmed by you." Layla's smile was warm and genuine. "Besides, I suspect there are things about being married to Blake Anderson that only another woman would understand." Blake made a sound that might have been amusement or alarm. "Layla, I'm sure Emma has—" "Nothing more important than getting to know my new friend," Emma interrupted, surprising herself, because the truth was, she could use some distance from Blake right now. some space to figure out what the hell had just happened between them and why she felt like her entire world had shifted off its axis. Wonderful. Layla clapped her hands together. Blake, you don't mind if I borrow your wife for the day, do you? Blake's gaze locked with Emma's again, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or disappointment. Of course not, he said smoothly. Emma deserves to be spoiled. 3 hours later, Emma found herself in the private shopping suite at Saks Fifth Avenue, surrounded by enough designer clothing to outfit a small country, trying to explain to Layla why she kept staring off into space. It's the kiss, isn't it? Layla said matter-of-factly, examining a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Emma's monthly grocery budget. Emma nearly dropped the dress she was holding. Excuse me? The way you and Blake looked at each other this morning. Like you'd just discovered something surprising. Layla's eyes sparkled with amusement. Darling, I've been married for 28 years. I know the difference between newlywed bliss and, oh my God, what have we done? Emma sank into one of the plush velvet chairs, abandoning all pretense. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been watching. You two have an interesting dynamic. Very intimate, but with an undercurrent of, how do I put this, unresolved tension. Like you're both holding back something important. Emma stared at Layla, wondering how much she could say without blowing their entire cover. Sometimes marriage is complicated. The best ones usually are. Layla sat in the chair across from her, her expression growing serious. Emma, may I speak frankly? Please. Hashim and I weren't a love match initially. Our marriage was arranged by our families. Very traditional, very practical. I was terrified of him for the first 6 months. Emma blinked. Terrified? He was so serious, so controlled. I felt like I was married to a stranger who spoke only in business terms and quarterly projections. Layla smiled softly. Sound familiar? A little, Emma admitted. It took us 2 years to have our first real conversation. Not about schedules or social obligations, but about our dreams, our fears, what kept us awake at night. I discovered he wrote poetry in secret. He discovered I painted watercolors and hid them because I thought they weren't good enough. Emma's chest tightened. What changed? I got sick. Nothing serious, just a terrible flu, but I was miserable and homesick, and convinced I'd made a terrible mistake marrying a man who didn't even seem to notice I existed. Layla's eyes grew distant with memory. Hashim took care of me. For a week, he barely left my side. He made soup, he read to me, he held my hand when I cried. And one night, when my fever broke, I woke up to find him asleep in the chair beside my bed, holding my hand like he was afraid I might disappear. And that's when you knew? That's when I knew he loved me, yes? But more importantly, that's when I realized I loved him too. I just hadn't been brave enough to admit it. Layla leaned forward, her voice gentle but direct. Emma, what are you afraid of? The question hit Emma like a physical blow. She thought about Blake's careful control, his admission that he didn't do relationships the way he'd kissed her like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. I'm afraid he doesn't know how to love someone, Emma said quietly. And I'm afraid I'm falling for someone who might never be able to love me back. Layla was quiet for a moment, then reached across to squeeze Emma's hand. Darling, that man cooked you breakfast in his pajamas. Men like Blake Anderson don't cook breakfast for just anyone. He was thinking about work. He said cooking helps him think. And what does he usually think about when he cooks? Emma considered this. Business deals, construction timelines, profit margins. But this morning, Emma's breath caught as she remembered his words. The Meridian project timeline mostly. Al-Mansouri wants to accelerate the construction schedule. But then he'd looked at her in those silk pajamas and forgotten what he was saying. He'd called her beautiful like the word had escaped without his permission. This morning was different, she admitted. Exactly. Layla smiled knowingly. Emma, I've known Blake for 5 years. I've seen him with other women. Beautiful, accomplished women who would have been perfect trophies for a man in his position. But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. How does he look at me? Like you're home? The word settled in Emma's chest like a warm weight. She thought about Blake playing piano in the dark, about him rescuing a dog that was too needy, about the way his hands had shaken when he'd told her about his father. Layla, Emma said slowly, what if someone has spent so long protecting themselves that they don't know how to stop? Then they need someone patient enough to wait while they figure it out. Someone brave enough to love them anyway. Layla's smile was gentle but knowing. The question is, are you that someone? Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Blake. How's the shopping? Layla hasn't bought out the entire store yet, has she? She stared at the message, seeing past the casual tone to the man who was probably pacing his office, wondering if she was okay, if she was having second thoughts about their kiss, if she was planning to run. Not yet, she typed back. But the day is young. How's Cooper? Missing you. Both of us are. Emma's heart did something stupid and fluttery at those words. Both of us are. Like he was admitting something he hadn't meant to admit. That's your answer right there, Layla said, having clearly read the texts over Emma's shoulder without shame. A man who admits he misses you after 3 hours apart is a man who's already halfway to being yours. Emma looked up at Layla, at this elegant woman who'd somehow become a confidant in the space of a morning. What if I'm wrong? Emma asked. What if I'm seeing things that aren't there? Then you'll have your heart broken by someone worth the risk. Layla stood, smoothing her skirt with decisive movements. But Emma, darling, I don't think you're wrong. I think you're just scared. She'd spent the entire ride up in the elevator practicing what she was going to say. Something articulate about how their kiss had changed things, how they needed to be honest about what was happening between them, how she was tired of pretending her feelings were part of the act. Instead, when Blake opened the door, all her carefully planned words evaporated. He looked exhausted. His tie was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair messed like he'd been running his hands through it all day. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. They held the same uncertainty she'd been carrying around since their lips had touched that morning. Hey, he said softly, stepping aside to let her in. How was your day with Layla? Educational, Emma said, setting down the shopping bags in the foyer. Cooper appeared immediately, tail wagging like she'd been gone for weeks instead of hours. How was your day of missing me? Blake went very still. You saw that text. I saw that text. Emma bent to scratch Cooper's ears, using the moment to gather her courage. Blake, we need to talk about this morning. Emma, Blake ran a hand through his hair, confirming her suspicions about its disheveled state. This morning was a mistake. I shouldn't have. Don't. Emma straightened, her voice sharper than she'd intended. Don't you dare call it a mistake. Blake's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. Emma, no, let me finish. Emma took a step closer and she saw Blake's hands clench at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. I spent the day with Layla, listening to her talk about her marriage, about love, about taking risks. And you know what I realized? Blake was watching her with the same intensity he brought to million-dollar negotiations, but his voice was quiet when he asked, What? I realized I've been just as scared as you are. Emma's heart was hammering, but her voice stayed steady. I've been hiding behind this fake marriage, pretending my feelings were just part of the act because it was safer than admitting the truth. Which is, Emma took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where she either changed everything or destroyed it completely. The truth is that I didn't fall in love with you this week, Blake. I've been falling for 3.5 years. One impossible deadline and one perfectly timed coffee delivery at a time. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I fell in love with the man who remembers I prefer almond milk, who works until midnight to make sure every detail is perfect, who rescued a dog because he understood what it felt like to be unwanted. Blake's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, hope, fear, something that looked dangerously like relief. Emma, you don't understand. I understand that you're terrified. Emma interrupted, stepping closer until she was almost within touching distance. I understand that your father left and taught you that loving someone means they'll eventually abandon you. I understand that control feels safer than vulnerability. But Blake, what I don't understand is why you're fighting something that could be the best thing that ever happened to both of us. Blake stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face like he was looking for proof that she meant every word. Because I don't know how to do this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma, I don't know how to be someone's husband. I don't know how to let someone that close without destroying everything. Do you want to learn? The question hung between them like a bridge. Emma watched Blake wrestle with himself, saw the exact moment when his careful control began to crack. Yes, he breathed. God, yes. But Emma, what if I'm not good at it? What if I hurt you? What if... Emma reached up and cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. Blake Anderson, you've been taking care of me for 3.5 years. You've been protecting me, supporting me, making my life better in 1,000 small ways. You already know how to love someone. You just haven't been calling it that. Blake's hands came up to cover hers, pressing her palms against his face like she was anchoring him. Emma, tell me what you're thinking. she said softly. No CEO mask, no careful control. Just Blake. Tell me what you want. Blake closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, Emma saw something that made her heart stop. Vulnerability. Hope. Love so deep it took her breath away. I want you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not for a week, not for a deal, not for show. I want you in my bed every morning arguing with me about my coffee schedule. I want you stealing bacon from my plate and laughing at Cooper's ridiculous attempts to fit in your lap. I want you challenging my decisions and making me remember that there's more to life than profit margins. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Blake, I want to play piano for you at midnight when I can't sleep, and I want to cook breakfast for you every morning, and I want to fall asleep knowing you'll still be there when I wake up. His thumbs stroked across her knuckles. I want to deserve you, Emma. I want to be the man you see when you look at me like that. Like what? Like I'm home. The words broke something open in Emma's chest. You are home, she whispered. Blake, you've been home for years. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. Blake's control finally completely shattered. He pulled her against him with desperate urgency, his mouth finding hers like he was drowning and she was air. This kiss was different from the morning's gentle exploration. This was raw, honest, full of 3.5 years of denied feelings and the promise of everything they could be together. Emma melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. She could taste his fear and his hope, could feel the way his hands shook as they tangled in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake pressed his forehead against hers. Emma, he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. Will you marry me? For real this time. Not for a deal, not for show. Marry me because I love you and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Emma laughed through her tears, joy bubbling up in her chest like champagne. Blake Anderson, are you proposing to your fake wife? I'm proposing to the woman I want to be my real wife, Blake said, his smile transforming his entire face. The woman who already knows all my worst habits and loves me anyway. The woman who makes me want to be better than I thought I could be. Yes, Emma breathed, then louder. Yes, you impossible, wonderful man. Yes. Blake spun her around, both of them laughing, Cooper barking excitedly at their feet like he knew something momentous had just happened. As Blake set her down and kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise and possibility, Emma realized that Layla had been right. Not just the obvious things, like the fact that she was in Blake's bed wearing one of his Columbia t-shirts, or that Cooper was sprawled across both their feet like a furry security blanket. It was the smaller shifts that made her heart race with equal parts joy and panic. The way Blake's breathing was still deep and even, suggesting he'd actually slept through the night for once. The way his hand rested possessively on her hip, even in sleep. The way the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows made everything feel possible and terrifying at the same time. Emma's phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from her sister. So how's the fake husband today, still fake? Emma stared at the message, then glanced at Blake's peaceful face. His dark hair was messed up, there was stubble along his jaw, and he looked younger somehow. Vulnerable. Hers. Not fake anymore, she typed back. It's complicated. The response came immediately. What? Call me. Now. Emma was trying to figure out how to explain 3.5 years of suppressed feelings in a text, when Blake stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. Morning, he murmured against her neck, his voice rough with sleep. You're awake early. It's 8:30. You're awake late. Blake lifted his head to look at her, and Emma's breath caught at the soft expression in his gray eyes. I slept better than I have in years. Good. Emma turned in his arms, studying his face. Blake, what happens now? Now. Blake's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. Now we figure out how to do this for real. Before Emma could respond, Blake's phone started ringing with the aggressive urgency that meant work crisis. Blake groaned, reaching across her to grab it from his nightstand. Anderson, he answered, his voice immediately shifting into CEO mode. What? When? How bad is the... He sat up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Emma watched the transformation happen in real time. Blake Anderson, the man who'd proposed to her last night while spinning her around his living room, disappearing behind Blake Anderson, the billionaire who had 16 different crises to manage before noon. I have to go, he said, already swinging his legs out of bed. The construction permits for the Meridian project got held up. Al Mansouri is flying back to Dubai tomorrow, and if we don't resolve this... Blake, Emma sat up, pulling his t-shirt down over her thighs. It's okay. Go handle your crisis. Blake paused in the middle of reaching for his clothes, turning back to look at her. Emma, about last night. Don't. Emma held up a hand, panic flaring in her chest. Don't you dare turn last night into something you need to apologize for. I'm not apologizing. I'm just... Blake sat back down on the edge of the bed, reaching for her hand. This is all new for me. The being in a relationship part. The having someone who matters more than the deal part. Emma felt some of her panic ease. What are you saying? I'm saying that 6 months ago I would have already been dressed and out the door, and I wouldn't have given a second thought to the woman I left in my bed. Blake's fingers intertwined with hers. But right now all I can think about is whether you'll still be here when I get back. The admission was so honest, so vulnerable, that Emma felt her heart crack open a little wider. Blake Anderson, I've been putting up with your impossible demands and your coffee schedule obsessions for 3.5 years. You really think a construction permit crisis is going to scare me off? Blake's smile was relief and gratitude, wrapped in something that looked like wonder. I love you. I love you too. Emma leaned forward to kiss him soft and quick. Now go save your $1 billion deal. I'll be here when you get back. With coffee? With coffee. And probably with Cooper stealing whatever breakfast I try to make. Blake kissed her once more, deeper this time, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. I'll be back by lunch. I'll be here. But after Blake left, Emma found herself staring at her reflection in his bathroom mirror, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, because loving Blake Anderson from a safe distance was one thing. Loving him up close, in real life, with all his complications and demands and billion-dollar responsibilities, that was something else entirely. Her phone rang. Her sister. Okay, explain, came Jenna's voice without preamble, and don't leave out any details. Emma sank onto Blake's sofa, Cooper immediately claiming her lap despite being far too large for such ambitions. It's a long story. I have time. Did you sleep with your fake husband? He's not fake anymore, Emma said quietly. Jenna, he proposed. For real. And I said yes. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long Emma wondered if the call had dropped. Jenna? Emma Catherine Mitchell, Jenna said finally. Are you telling me you fell in love with your billionaire boss during a fake marriage? I didn't fall in love with him during the fake marriage, Emma protested. I fell in love with him 3.5 years ago. The fake marriage just made me admit it. And he loves you back? Emma thought about the way Blake had looked at her that morning, like she was something precious and impossible. Yes, I think he does. You think? I know he does, it's just... Emma struggled to find the words. Jenna, what if I'm not enough? What if the reality of being with someone like Blake is too much? What if... Emma, Jenna's voice was gentle but firm. You've been managing that man's entire life for 3.5 years. You've seen him at his worst, his most demanding, his most impossible. And you're still there. If that's not love, I don't know what is. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. But what if it's different now? What if expectations change? What if you stop overthinking and just be happy? Jenna interrupted. Emma, you've been in love with this man for years. He finally woke up and realized he loves you too. Stop looking for problems and start planning a wedding. Emma laughed despite herself. We just got engaged 12 hours ago. And knowing Blake Anderson, he probably already has a timeline and a budget spreadsheet. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Blake. The permit issue is fixed. Al Mansouri wants to have dinner tonight to celebrate. Both couples. Wear the blue dress from yesterday. I love you. Emma stared at the message, warmth spreading through her chest. Even in the middle of a work crisis, he was thinking about her, about them, about their life together. I love you too, she typed back. Handle your business. I'll handle the dress. As Emma hung up with her sister and started planning her day, Cooper watching her with alert brown eyes, she realized something that made her smile. For the first time in 3.5 years, she wasn't managing Blake Anderson's life. Emma stood in front of the mirror in Blake's bedroom, adjusting the blue dress for the 3rd time, trying to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Dinner with the Al Mansouris to celebrate the successful completion of their business deal, a victory lap before they returned to Dubai. Instead, it felt like a test she wasn't sure she could pass. Blake emerged from his walk-in closet, adjusting his cufflinks with sharp, precise movements that told Emma his day had been even more stressful than expected. He looked immaculate as always. Charcoal suit, silver tie, every hair in place. But there was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there that morning. You look beautiful, he said, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. Thank you. Emma turned to face him, studying his expression. Blake, are you okay? You seem… I'm fine. The response was automatic, the same tone he used with board members and business partners. We should go. The car is waiting. Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. Blake. What? He was checking his phone, scrolling through what she assumed were work emails. Look at me. Blake glanced up and Emma saw it. The careful distance in his gray eyes. The professional mask sliding back into place. The same look he'd worn for 3.5 years before last night changed everything. We're going to be late, he said. 20 minutes later, Emma sat beside Blake in the back of his town car, the leather seat between them feeling like an ocean. He was on his phone, speaking in rapid, clipped tones about construction schedules and permit modifications, his free hand drumming against his knee in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained stress. Emma watched the city blur past the tinted windows and wondered if this was what their life was going to look like. Blake retreating into work whenever the real world became too complicated, leaving her to figure out how to love someone who kept disappearing behind his own success. The restaurant was one of those places that didn't need a sign, because everyone who mattered already knew where it was. Hashim and Layla were waiting at a corner table, and Emma felt her anxiety ease slightly when Layla smiled warmly and stood to embrace her. Emma, darling, you look radiant. Marriage agrees with you. If only she knew, Emma thought, accepting Layla's kiss on both cheeks. Congratulations are in order, Hashim said, shaking Blake's hand with genuine warmth. The Meridian project is going to be magnificent. Your team's work today was exemplary. Thank you, Blake replied, his CEO smile firmly in place. It's been a pleasure working with you. As they settled into their seats, Emma noticed the way Blake positioned himself, angled slightly away from her, his attention focused entirely on the Al-Mansuris. Professional, distant, like she was just another business associate at the table. The conversation flowed around her. Construction timelines, international partnerships, market projections. Emma smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, but she felt like she was watching herself from outside her body, playing the role of Blake Anderson's wife while the man himself acted like she barely existed. Emma, Layla said, during a lull in the business talk, Blake tells us you're considering making some career changes now that you're married. How exciting. Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I'm sorry? Blake's posture went rigid beside her. Layla, I think there might have been some miscommunication. Oh, but you said Emma might want to step back from her current role to focus on your life together. Layla continued innocently. I think it's wonderful when couples can support each other's priorities. The words hit Emma like ice water. She turned to look at Blake, whose face had gone carefully blank. Blake, Emma said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. What career changes? Emma, we can discuss this later. We can discuss it now. Emma set down her fork with deliberate care. What did you tell them? The table had gone silent, Hashim and Layla exchanging uncomfortable glances as they realized they'd stumbled into something explosive. Blake's jaw tightened. I may have mentioned that your current position might not be sustainable, given our new circumstances. Sustainable. Emma repeated the word like it was a foreign concept. And why wouldn't my job be sustainable? Because you're my wife now, Blake said, his voice low but carrying the edge of frustration. Because having you as my assistant while we're married creates complications, HR issues, conflicts of interest. Emma felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. So you've already decided I should quit my job. I didn't decide anything. I said we might need to explore other options. Without talking to me first. Blake's eyes flashed. Emma, be reasonable. You can't seriously expect things to stay exactly the same between us professionally. Actually, that's exactly what I expected. Emma's voice was rising despite her efforts to keep it controlled. Because my job isn't just a job, Blake. It's my career. It's what I've worked for. It's who I am. You're my wife now, that's who you are. The words hung in the air like a slap. Emma felt every assumption she'd made about their relationship, every hope she'd allowed herself to have, crumble into dust. Excuse me, she said, standing abruptly. I need some air. Emma was halfway to the restaurant's exit when Blake caught up with her, his hand closing around her wrist. Emma, wait. Don't touch me. Emma jerked away from him, her composure finally cracking. Don't you dare touch me right now. They were standing in the restaurant's elegant foyer, other diners pretending not to stare at the billionaire and his wife having what was clearly a very public, very explosive fight. Can we please discuss this at home? Blake asked, his voice tight with controlled frustration. Home? Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. Blake, I don't even know what home means anymore. Apparently, I don't know what anything means. Emma, you're being dramatic. I'm being dramatic? Emma's voice cracked. Blake, you just told your business partners that I might quit my job without bothering to mention it to me first. You spent the entire evening treating me like an accessory instead of a partner. And when I called you out on it, you told me that being your wife is who I am now. As if everything I was before doesn't matter anymore. Blake ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Emma demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you decided that loving me means controlling me. It looks like you think being married gives you the right to make decisions about my life without including me. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From having a career? From being independent? From being myself? Emma felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. Blake, I fell in love with you despite your need to control everything. I didn't fall in love with you so you could control me too. Blake's face went pale. Emma, that's not... I would never... Wouldn't you? Emma stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than shouting. Blake, your father left you, so you decided you couldn't trust anyone to stay. But instead of working through that fear, you've decided to handle it by making sure I can't leave, by making me financially dependent on you, by turning me into someone who exists only in relation to your life. Blake flinched like she'd struck him. That's not true, isn't it? Emma's voice broke. Because right now, it feels like you don't want a wife, Blake. You want a beautiful, controllable extension of yourself. And I can't be that person. I won't be that person. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of Emma's heart breaking and Blake's world shifting off its axis. So what are you saying? Blake asked finally, his voice barely audible. Emma looked at the man she loved, at his carefully controlled expression and his white-knuckled hands, and felt something die in her chest. I'm saying, I need time to figure out if the man I fell in love with actually exists, she whispered, or if he was just another part of the act. Without waiting for his response, Emma turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Blake standing alone in the foyer, surrounded by the wreckage of everything they'd built together. It had been 5 days since Emma walked out of that restaurant, 5 days since she'd looked at him like he was a stranger, 5 days since she'd moved back to her tiny apartment in Brooklyn Heights and refused to take his calls. 5 days of Cooper whining at the door, waiting for someone who wasn't coming home. 5 days of Blake finally understanding what his father had thrown away. Sir, his current temporary assistant, the fourth one this week, peered nervously through his office door. Ms. Al-Mansouri is here to see you. Blake looked up, confused. Ms. Al-Mansouri flew back to Dubai on Monday. Not Mrs. Al-Mansouri, sir. Ms. Layla Al-Mansouri. She says you need a friend. Before Blake could process that statement, Layla swept into his office with the same elegant confidence she'd shown at dinner 5 nights ago, the dinner where Blake had destroyed everything that mattered to him. Blake, darling, Layla said, settling into the chair across from his desk like she'd been invited. You look terrible. Thank you, Blake said dryly. It's always nice to see you too, Layla. Where is Emma? The question hit him like a physical blow. Emma and I are taking some time apart. Ah, Layla nodded knowingly. And how is that working for you? Blake gestured at the chaos of his office, the reports he couldn't focus on, the coffee cups that had gone cold, the phone that kept ringing with calls he couldn't bring himself to answer. Brilliantly, as you can see. Layla was quiet for a moment, studying his face with the kind of maternal concern that made Blake want to hide under his desk. Blake, she said finally, what did you do? What makes you think I did something? Layla raised an eyebrow. Because 5 days ago I watched you look at that woman like she was your entire world, and then I watched you treat her like she was your property. So I'll ask again, what did you do? Blake felt something crack in his chest. I tried to protect her. From what? From making a mistake. From choosing me over her career. From... Blake stopped, the truth lodging in his throat like broken glass. From leaving you. Layla finished gently. Blake's hands clenched on his desk. My father walked away from everything. His career, his family, me, for the promise of something better. I can't let Emma do the same thing. I can't let her sacrifice everything for me, and then wake up one day and realize she made a mistake. So instead, you made the choice for her. I was trying to be practical, realistic. You were trying to control the situation so you couldn't get hurt. Layla interrupted, but her voice was gentle. Blake, darling, do you know what the difference is between your father and Emma? Blake shook his head, not trusting his voice. Your father left because he was selfish. He wanted something more exciting, more rewarding, more fulfilling than the life he had. Layla leaned forward, her dark eyes serious. Emma has been choosing you every day for 3.5 years, even when you gave her every reason to leave. She's not your father, Blake. She's the woman who sees the best in you and loves you anyway. Blake closed his eyes, Emma's words from that terrible night echoing in his head. I fell in love with you despite your need to control everything. She left, he said quietly. She didn't leave. She's protecting herself from a man who was trying to erase who she is. Layla stood, smoothing her skirt. Blake, that woman loves you. But she loves herself too, and that's what makes her worthy of you. The question is, are you worthy of her? After Layla left, Blake sat alone in his office as the sun set over Manhattan, her words cycling through his mind like a mantra. Are you worthy of her? The honest answer was no, not yet. But maybe, if he fought hard enough, if he changed fast enough, if he proved to Emma that he could love her without trying to control her, maybe he could become worthy. Blake picked up his phone and did something he'd never done in 15 years of running Anderson Enterprises. He called his lawyer and told him to clear his schedule for the rest of the week. Emma was in her kitchen, eating ice cream straight from the container while Biscuit judged her from his perch on the counter, when someone knocked on her door, not the polite knock of a neighbor or the impatient rap of a delivery driver. 3 careful, measured knocks that somehow managed to sound like an apology. Emma's heart started racing before she even looked through the peephole. Blake stood in her hallway, and he looked different. His usually perfect hair was messed up, his tie was loose, and he was holding a manila folder in one hand and what looked like a cup of coffee in the other. Emma opened the door but didn't invite him in. Blake, Emma. His gray eyes searched her face like he was memorizing every detail. You look tired? Angry? Like I've been eating ice cream for breakfast? Emma crossed her arms, hating how her heart jumped just from seeing him. Beautiful, Blake said quietly. You look beautiful. Emma felt her resolve waver, then forced it back into place. What are you doing here? I brought you coffee. Almond milk, 1 sugar, shot of vanilla. Blake held out the cup like a peace offering. From that place in Brooklyn Heights you like, the one with the terrible music and the barista who flirts with everyone. Despite herself, Emma felt her mouth twitch. Dante doesn't flirt with everyone, just with people who tip well. I tipped very well. Emma took the coffee, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent electricity up her arm and she saw Blake's breath catch. Thank you, she said. But if you came here to, I came here to apologize. Blake interrupted. And to give you this. He held out the manila folder. Emma frowned, setting the coffee aside to take the folder. Inside was a single document, official, legal, covered in the kind of dense language that made her head hurt. Blake, what is this? It's a contract, Blake said. Specifically, it's a contract offering you the position of Creative Director of Strategic Development at Anderson Enterprises. Emma's eyes widened. What? It's a new position. You'd be responsible for overseeing the creative and cultural aspects of our major projects, working with architects, designers, community liaisons. You'd have your own department, your own budget, your own team. Blake's voice grew stronger as he explained. The salary is triple what you were making as my assistant, plus equity and full benefits. Emma stared at the contract, her mind reeling. Blake, I don't understand. The position reports directly to the board of directors, Blake continued. Not to me, never to me. Your job security, your career advancement, your professional future. None of it depends on me or our relationship. Emma looked up at him, seeing something in his expression that made her chest tight. Blake, Emma, you were right. About everything. Blake's voice was rough with emotion. I was trying to control you because I was terrified of losing you. I was so scared of becoming my father that I was willing to turn you into someone who couldn't leave, instead of becoming someone you'd want to stay with. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Blake, I love you, Blake said, stepping closer. I love your independence, your strength, your refusal to let anyone, including me, diminish who you are. I don't want you to be Mrs. Blake Anderson, trophy wife. I want you to be Emma Mitchell, the woman who challenges me, who makes me better, who builds her own empire right beside mine. Emma's hands shook as she looked down at the contract again. This position, it's everything I've ever wanted professionally. I know. And Emma, whether you take me back or not, the job is yours if you want it. Because you've earned it. Because you're brilliant. And because I should have offered you something like this years ago instead of keeping you trapped answering my phones. Emma set the contract aside, studying Blake's face. She could see the fear there, the vulnerability, the desperate hope that he was trying to hide. What happens if I take the job and we don't work out? She asked quietly. What happens if we break up and I have to see you every day at board meetings? Blake's smile was sad but genuine. Then we'll be two people who loved each other once and who are professional enough to work together anyway. Emma, I won't lie and say it won't be hard, but I'd rather see you every day and know you're living your best life than never see you again, because I was too selfish to let you go. Emma felt the last of her walls crumble. You really mean that? I really mean that. Blake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hands cupped her face gently. Emma, I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise I won't sometimes slip back into old habits when I'm scared. But I can promise that I'll never again try to make you smaller to make myself feel safer. Emma searched his eyes and found the truth there. Raw, honest, terrifying in its completeness. Blake Anderson, she whispered. Are you asking me to marry you again? I'm asking you to build a life with me, Blake said. As equals, as partners, as two people who choose each other every day. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Emma's answer was a kiss. Soft, sweet, full of forgiveness and possibility, and the promise of a future built on trust instead of fear. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Emma smiled through her tears. So, she said, when do I start my new job? Blake's laugh was pure joy. Tomorrow if you want. But first, he dropped to one knee right there in her tiny apartment hallway, pulling a ring box from his jacket pocket. Emma Mitchell, will you marry me? Not because it's convenient for business, not because it looks good to investors, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the incredible woman you are. Emma looked down at the man she'd loved for 3.5 years. The man who'd finally learned the difference between loving someone and controlling them, and felt her heart overflow. Yes, she breathed. Yes, you impossible, wonderful man. Yes. As Blake slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her again, Emma realized that Layla had been right about one thing. 18 months later, Emma woke up to the sound of piano music drifting through their apartment and smiled before she even opened her eyes. Not the sad, solitary Chopin that Blake used to play when he thought no one was listening. This was something lighter, more playful, Debussy maybe, with improvisations that spoke of contentment rather than longing. Emma stretched in their bed in their apartment, the penthouse they'd redesigned together to feel like home instead of a museum, and checked the clock. 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday. Some things never changed. Cooper raised his head from his spot at the foot of the bed, tail thumping against the comforter in a lazy morning greeting. At 3.5, he'd grown into his massive paws and learned that Emma's side of the bed was excellent for stealing extra warmth. Come on, boy, Emma whispered, slipping out of bed and padding toward the sound of music. Let's go see what your dad is up to. The sight that greeted her in the living room made her heart do that stupid fluttery thing it had been doing for almost 2 years now. Blake sat at his baby grand piano, the one he'd finally moved out of the spare room and into the heart of their home, wearing nothing but pajama pants and a concentrated expression. His hair stuck up in 12 different directions, and there was a coffee mug cooling on top of the piano that he'd clearly forgotten about. But it was the papers spread across the piano bench beside him that made Emma pause. Architectural drawings, building plans, and unless she was mistaken, those were sketches for the new children's hospital wing that her department had been developing for the past 6 months. Blake Anderson, Emma said, leaning against the doorframe. Are you working on my project at 6:30 on a Saturday morning? Blake's hands stilled on the keys, and he turned to look at her with that soft smile that still made her forget how to breathe properly. Good morning to you too, Mrs. Anderson, he said, standing to cross the room and wrap his arms around her waist. And I wasn't working on your project. I was composing a theme song for it. A theme song. Every great architectural project needs a soundtrack, Blake said seriously, pressing a kiss to her temple. I was thinking something hopeful but sophisticated, inspiring but not overwhelming, like its creative director. Emma laughed, melting into his embrace. You're ridiculous. I'm inspired. Blake's hands traced lazy patterns on her back. Do you know what today is? Emma pretended to think. Saturday? It's the 1-year anniversary of the day you told the Anderson Enterprises Board of Directors that their proposed design for the Morrison Community Center looked like a concrete box designed by people who hate joy. I was diplomatic about it, Emma protested. You told them to go back to the drawing board and this time, maybe try talking to the people who would actually use the building. Blake's eyes sparkled with pride and amusement. It was magnificent. I've never been more attracted to you. That's saying something considering you married me. Speaking of which, Blake reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emma's heart stopped. Blake, we're already married. Very married. Legally, religiously, and according to the very expensive wedding planner who nearly had a nervous breakdown over our flower choices. I know, Blake said, opening the box to reveal a delicate band covered in tiny diamonds. But I realized we never got you a proper wedding band. The engagement ring we picked out together, but the wedding band. We were so focused on everything else that we grabbed something simple from the jewelry store the day before the ceremony. Emma looked down at her left hand at the simple platinum band that sat next to her engagement ring. She'd never minded its simplicity. She'd been too happy to care about jewelry. Blake, you don't need to. I wanted to, Blake interrupted gently. Emma, this past year and a half it's been everything I never knew I wanted. Watching you build your department from the ground up, seeing you challenge developers and architects twice your age, coming home to someone who makes me want to be better than I was the day before. Blake took her left hand, sliding the old band off and replacing it with the new one. It fit perfectly, catching the morning light like captured starlight. I wanted you to have something that matches how I feel about being married to you, Blake said softly. Like the luckiest man alive. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Blake, also, Blake added, his tone shifting to something more playful. Cooper helped pick it out. He has excellent taste in jewelry. As if summoned by his name, Cooper appeared between them, tail wagging, clearly hoping this emotional moment might result in breakfast. Emma laughed through her tears, looking down at the ring that somehow managed to be both elegant and uniquely her. Not too flashy, not too simple, just perfect. It's beautiful, she said, but you know what the best part of being married to you is? My devastatingly good looks and charming personality? Your devastating humility, Emma corrected, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. Actually, it's the fact that you play piano at 6 in the morning and leave architectural drawings on the bench, and when I find you, you're not stressed or hiding or trying to control everything. You're just here, present, mine. Blake's expression grew serious. Always yours, Emma, even when I'm being impossible. Especially when you're being impossible, Emma said. That's when I know you trust me enough to let me see the real you. They stood there in their living room, surrounded by the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, Cooper circling their feet in hopes of attention, the piano waiting patiently for Blake to finish his impromptu composition. Emma looked around their home, at the bookshelves they'd filled together, at the photographs from their honeymoon in Tuscany, at the blanket thrown carelessly over the sofa from their movie night the evening before, at the life they'd built together brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. Blake, she said suddenly, play me our song. We don't have a song. We do now. Emma sat on the piano bench, making room for him beside her. Play me the theme song for the Children's Hospital. Play me something hopeful but sophisticated, something that sounds like home. Blake sat beside her, his fingers finding the keys with the same confidence he brought to everything else in his life. But this time, that confidence was tempered with something softer. Something that looked a lot like contentment. As the music filled their apartment, complex but warm, structured but free, perfectly imperfect, like the love they'd built together, Emma closed her eyes and listened to the sound of her husband creating something beautiful just because he could. Cooper settled at their feet with a contented sigh. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold, and Emma Anderson realized that this was what happiness sounded like. Not the dramatic crescendos of fairy tales, but the quiet, steady rhythm of two people who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other, every single day. What's the most important lesson love taught you? Emma and Blake's story reminds us that real love isn't about control or possession. It's about seeing someone completely and choosing to support their dreams, even when those dreams don't revolve around you. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone be exactly who they're meant to be, and trusting that they'll choose to build that life alongside you. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.